Hello, Jessica and TJ. Welcome to the Women Waken podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Whitney. Excited to be here too.
Yeah, so excited to have you both. You're my second duo, which is very fun and exciting. I love duos. I love, the more discourse, the more conversation with more people. I love that. So this is going to be a very fun talk, especially because we all have backgrounds in addiction and recovery. And I think we're all kind of on the same page and like-minded in terms of how we approach treatment and recovery and our own path of recovery. So it's going to be interesting and exciting to chat with you both.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Jessica, it was a divine intervention that got us all together here today because TJ and I are old buddies, but we hadn't talked in a while. And then Jessica, you actually emailed me based on a referral. You were looking for, I was looking for a referral and you answered. Yep. And then I think you said I'd like to hear about your podcast. So we connected and I didn't know that you two were connected. I didn't realize that you worked on the Conscious Recovery for Teens workbook together.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was really cool to find out. And then you and I had the most amazing conversation and we were basically the same person and we totally
Exactly.
resonated.
I was like, are we best friends?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we totally are. And then TJ is obviously our best friend as well. So we said, why not bring us all together and talk about all the things?
Love it.
Here we are. Yeah. And then of course I know TJ from, I think it was 2019, back in the old days before this decade, a different world. And TJ, you had a big impact on me because I actually met you at a time. So I've been in recovery for 7 years, sober for 7 years. And I did 12-step programs for many years. And then around that time that I met you, I was feeling kind of this draw towards seeking out something else, looking for a different step in my recovery. And we met together we met at a networking event. And I didn't know, the depth of your work with conscious recovery and sort of this alternative approach. And everything you said to me was just like, bam, bam. It was like hitting on all the things that had been coming up for me. And I was kind of asking myself, do I have to keep doing this approach forever? And you basically offered, no, you don't have to do anything, but there are also other ways. And that really opened a door to me that I moved through. So I've always really appreciated that and just really appreciated you for bringing this to light, bringing this into the world and offering people different ideas about what recovery is and what addiction is, and not having to see it in just one standard way, but in a different way.
Yeah. And, I'm so passionate about the conversation of offering different paths. For me and my recovery, at each sort of stage of recovery, there was something else wanted and needed. And I've basically just tried and done everything. And when I was a couple years sober, I found myself wanting to kill myself, honestly. And it was a very dark time. And I met a woman who changed my life. I talk about her all the time. I've dedicated my life's work to her, Mary Helen. And she really took me on this journey of rediscovering my true nature. And from that moment until Conscious Recovery was born in its sort of material form, I knew that it was mine to bring the gift that was given to me. We hear that a lot in recovery. This gift was given to me. She just, through her presence and her consciousness and quite love, changed me in such a deep way that at some point I realized it was mine to share this with the world. And I love that we're living in a remarkable time in human history where I think more and more people are saying there isn't just one answer. As a matter of fact, for every time I think I have an answer, I end up having about 12 questions at least. So we're really in a new time of exploration, of re-identifying the way we see mental health, addiction, healthcare in general. And I think the last few years during the pandemic have really actually brought that to the surface more quickly. So I think it's a really wonderful time to be alive and be exploring these topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so true, is that as much, sometimes chaos and strange changes that are happening right now, we're also letting go of old structures and standards that we used to really hold tight to and say, this is the way, and we have to stay within these confines. But we are breaking down those walls more and more and saying, but is that true? Is it true that we have to work within these confines? Is it true that this is the only way? And so more and more people are coming forward and sharing different ways. And that's what I really honor about you, TJ, is that you've actually done it. you had an idea and you spoke it, you brought it into the world, you brought it into being. And that takes a lot. I'm at this point in my work where I'm sort of in that shadow of, oh my gosh, do I step out with some of my thoughts? Do I bring something to light? Because it's hard. You give birth to it, right? You have to, and birthing is a hard process.
Yeah. And I think at some point in this show, I would love to talk about that process. It's something that isn't often asked. So I would like to share with the viewers, the people who are listening, really what that journey was like. And the short version, because I know Jessica's going to introduce herself. The short version is I didn't want to do it. I said no. My mind was like, nope, I'm not going to write a book about recovery. I'm not a recovery guy. I'm going a different direction. But I just trusted the inner voice. So I look forward to exploring that more.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'll make note of that. And then
I want to hear more about it. I've heard, I love hearing TJ speak still to this day. I'm like fan number
should we
one.
just go with it? And then we won't forget Jessica. We won't forget Jessica.
No, let's go with it now.
Yeah,
I'll chime in. I want to hear it. I want to hear it now.
Yeah, we want it now.
You know me, I can talk about it
Please.
now. I can always talk about it now. That's what, as a matter of fact, I want to share something. When my friend and mentor, Mary Helen, passed away, it wasn't the very last thing she said, but toward the end of her life, and we knew it was coming, she said, "You are really extroverted," which, by the way, is an understatement. And she was not that at all. Like, she would not speak. No way would she do this show, but her gift was being with someone one-on-one. And toward the end of her life, she said, "You are so extroverted. And I just know that you're going to use that extroversion to take this message to a larger audience." So it was as if she passed the torch to me, and I took it and said, okay, I guess that's mine to do. So the story of birthing conscious recovery, at some point in my own evolution, I realized something profound. And that is, I say profound, it might be very simple to some people, but it was profound to me. And that was when I create my life from my mind, it seemed like I was having struggle, like something would start and not work well, or I would do something and I wouldn't feel fulfilled, or I felt like I was pushing against the stream. And then at one point, I realized that when I get quiet and listen to inner wisdom, and through the formal visioning process, a visioning process is really being still enough and asking the inner wisdom, what is the highest vision and version of my life? And that has been a practice for years. And when I started doing that, I'm going to say around 2016, conscious recovery kept coming up. I had already written my first book, which was Conscious Being. I was working in the addiction treatment field. I loved it. And my mind was like, I'm not going to be a recovery guy. I'm not going to be pigeonholed. But I learned at that point, I knew enough to listen to inner wisdom, and it just kept coming up. So I finally, after about 6 months to a year, I yielded to that, and I wrote the outline to the book. I did a webinar on it, and it just started feeling there was this great momentum around it. And I'm so grateful, because had I gotten what I thought I wanted to do, it would have been so much smaller. And I don't mean like, it's not about the number, but it's the mission and the movement and the purpose of conscious recovery is so much bigger than my mind could have ever imagined. And saying yes and yielding to and listening to inner wisdom, and then being patient enough to allow the action to come organically has been such a profound process. And I just saw a memory on Facebook 7 years ago was when my first book was published. And I think about what has happened since then. It's quite remarkable. And it's no way did I plan that. It was about listening to that inner wisdom.
Yeah, that is so important. And it can be challenging at times, because sometimes our inner wisdom is telling us something we might not want to hear, like you're saying, like you didn't want to do it. But if it just keeps coming back, it's so important to acknowledge it and allow for that to see what that's about.
Yeah. And just to be really transparent, it's not because I'm so wise. It's because I tried not listening to it, and it was really painful.
Yeah.
Right. It was really
Exactly.
painful when I struggled. And then I realized, oh, when I listen to inner wisdom and I take action from that, life is easy. It's simple. It's fulfilling. It's energizing. It's just a much easier way to live. And guess what? More people get served, because as I listen to the inner wisdom, then it's like, oh, this isn't about me anymore. It's about we. It's about collaboration. It's about really being on purpose on planet Earth, and not like, I want to get what I want, because gosh, that's exhausting. And I did it for decades, and it landed me in some really dark places. So surrender is an amazing thing. And for me, it was a process, but it can also be a momentary experience.
Yeah. Would you say, I'm just curious, did it take you a few times to hit that groove, to get into the flow of your inner wisdom? Did you try a few things before that? Because, you know, I know myself and so many people, as you said, I think earlier on in life, we operate often by ego and pride, maybe like, I want this and I have to do this. And it feels very forceful, right? It's like you're pushing, there's so much effort into it. And then I feel like as I get older, as you're saying, I'm drawn more to the things that come more with ease, but it's still kind of, it's like this letting go process, like moving into that place where you're like, okay, I'm actually surrendering to, even though it wasn't what I had in mind, it seems what I keep getting called to, what keeps, you know, it has the most abundance around it. It has the most momentum around it, as you spoke to. But I think it can be hard for people to think they can find that, even though it's the most natural thing to find, right? Because it's right there.
Well, I was at a pretty dark point at one time in my life, and I was on a bus, and I was going from Marin to San Francisco, and it was so clear to me that I needed to write my personal mission statement. And I just sat in meditation on the bus, and it came to me, and I wrote it on an index card. And I realized at that moment that the specifics aren't really the purpose. It really was the quality, right? So, I mean, I could share my mission statement. It hasn't changed, but to your point, what happened for me is that I would get this vision, and then my mind would jump into like, oh, I know how that's supposed to look. And then I would go right back into what we could call self-will, right? Through the ego, I was trying to make it happen instead of being an allowance, instead of being the frequency of that expansion. Because when I listen to inner wisdom, it's always so much greater than I could have imagined. And I always have everything, enough time, enough money, enough people around me. All of that comes with so much more ease. And once I really understood that the struggle wasn't moving me in the direction I wanted to go, and it wasn't really serving me or other people, then it became really easy. My friend, Dr. Sue Morter, says, life is difficult and a struggle until it's not. And that's been my experience.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, TJ. All right, Miss Jessica,
Hey.
can we hear from you? Can we hear about you?
Well, yes, absolutely. So I've loved hearing both of you so far, and I have so many things I want to say, but just a little bit about, so, you know, who am I? That's always the question of the day. But I'm Dr. Jessica Byrd-Olmstead, and I'm a licensed psychologist, human being, refer to myself sometimes as a spiritual mammal. You know, it's, in hearing TJ just talk, and I'll introduce myself a bit more, but just the one thing that kept resonating with me is how much courage it takes to just be ourselves. It can be terrifying. It can be terrifying. But I feel like for me over the years, I've had moments where that inner voice, that essential self that I have, has told me pretty loud and clear I need to do certain things, and I would push it away. I would push it away and push it away because I thought I knew how to be successful, or exactly what you were saying, TJ. I knew what the outcome should be, how it should be executed down to every granular detail. And that's just not how my life has been. So my life has truly been an adventure. And just some of my background in this work, you know, we go way back. We could start with birth, but I don't know if we'll have time, maybe for another show.
Let's do it. Go for it.
I know. Okay, so from the Bay Area originally, still here, love it. It's an amazing place, beautiful place. You know, but I'm a trauma survivor. I grew up in an addicted family system. I was around chaos. I didn't know that at the time. I could be around chaos and trauma all day and it will feel comfortable because I didn't know otherwise. I always say I'm at most ease when I'm on the subway in New York City and surrounded by, you know, rats and garbage. I actually absolutely love New York City. But because I grew up in chaotic environments, that's where I found peace, because I didn't know any different. And I didn't realize that for a long time. And I eventually had a very severe addiction in my adolescence. And I can reflect back now as, you know, a whole, you know, functional, for the most part, adult and say, wow, that kid didn't know any different. I didn't know better. But I was really in the throes of a very severe and really deadly addiction. And I was, I'd like to say, perhaps it was divine, perhaps it was the universe, perhaps it was the people that I was able to connect through in my life, but I was able to get sober at 19 years old. But it was, even that in and of itself was a journey. And I, similar to TJ, I've seen some dark places. And I took that, though, I took those experiences and I worked to transform them into something different. But for a long time, and still to this day, sometimes I carried a lot of shame. There was a lot of shame. I thought, well, I can only be honest about my story once I'm president of the United States. I can only be honest about my story once I have X amount of dollars in the bank, because then I'll be whole. And then I can tell people that I'm in recovery, or then I can tell people what happened to me. And so I lived with such shame. And quite frankly, it fueled a lot of my professional life because I wanted to achieve. And I didn't realize that it came from this deep place of hurt and suffering. And I really made it mostly my life's mission to help others. Got a PhD in clinical psychology, worked with adolescents. But even through that experience, there were structures in place where in certain places, whether, overt or covert, I was told, don't tell people you're in recovery. Don't talk about addiction. Don't talk about your story, right? So I just thought, I'm just going to be an academic. I'm a researcher, right? I'm a scientist, and which I am all of those things. But I had shut off this other side of me that really made me who's my essential self, as TJ would say, my true self. And so much of my work over these more recent years have been, it's like this concept of recovery has been really coming back to that sense of self, not only through my personal recovery, but through my professional work. And so that's why I say it's been an adventure. And just, my official credentials are, I'm a doctor, psychologist. I've been in multiple leadership positions. I'm a female entrepreneur. I own a startup company. I own a private practice, right? I have the bullet points, but with that, there's things that are so much greater. And that's where I know we'll talk about it, but that's where conscious recovery comes into play. Because along that journey, actually, when I was in the middle of opening a treatment center for another company here in Silicon Valley for a company called The Meadows, TJ and I crossed paths, and we were introduced by a mutual colleague of mine, Lisa, who's a wonderful clinician in her own right. And I knew immediately that, it's, you just have that sense sometimes when you meet someone that there was something very, I don't want to say, maybe it is cosmic. I know, I feel that way with our relationship, TJ, but just hearing his story when I first met him and what he was doing with this work and addressing the root causes of addiction and thinking about what if we looked at what's going right with people? What if we looked at these innate powers that are already within us that were never lost? I mean, that was just, I've been waiting for that. And I'd been waiting to reclaim that. And so when we had the opportunity to start collaborating and putting together, treatment curriculum and this workbook for adolescents, Conscious Recovery for Teens, quite frankly, it hasn't felt like work. I enjoy every second of our time together. And so it's really, and just speaking to what you said again, TJ, conscious recovery is so much more than just addiction treatment. It's so much more than mental health treatment. It really is this movement for people to heal. Anyone. Because we all have the human experience. So I'm just, that's my extra long intro. I'm a little caffeinated too. But I think I've touched the high points for now, but we can get into it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jessica. And it sounds like you have a very colorful and wide breadth of what you do in your work as a psychologist, and maybe you tap into other outlets as well in terms of what you're doing. Do you work at recovery centers?
So I've done, when I go back to the resume, so I spent years working in a hospital setting, And I was in leadership positions in both child psychiatry and adolescent addiction medicine, doing in different various leadership roles in hospital and integrated care settings. And all the while had a private practice, really working largely with folks in recovery, codependency recovery. And then I am very much immersed and had been advising for mental health technology startups based out of Silicon Valley, and really taking my clinical expertise and helping, how do we leverage technology and use it as this force for greater good? So that's always been in the background. I ultimately left that hospital several years ago. And like I said, I launched a private treatment center for addiction and trauma recovery for adults. And then, part of my own journey, I launched it. It's been wildly successful. I left that company and I got to travel the world. And I always tell people this story. I haven't stopped since preschool. I never took a break. And that was part of my recovery, because I've been go, because it's that shame. In so many ways, that shame was driving me to I can't stop, because if I stop, well, first of all, I'm probably gonna have to look at myself, and that's terrifying, right? Being our true selves, like I said, is a courageous act. And so I had a hard time slowing down, but I was able to, and just travel, and it was wonderful. And I'm so lucky that I did, because I spent a couple of years traveling internationally. And quite frankly, I never thought I didn't think I'd live long enough to see the world, nor did I think I'd ever be in a place where I'd have the privilege to do so. I didn't think very big of my life as a young person. My world was very small. And so I've been blessed now to, travel and do these different things. And from that, what was born out of my travel is my most recent venture, which is a startup called Air Bear, where we focus on travel stress and flight anxiety. So that's just, again, another project I've been working on. It's been fantastic. And it doesn't feel like work, right? Mm-hmm. It's fun. I get to help people and integrate technology and integrate my clinical expertise. And then most recently, I've also gone back to a leadership position in a hospital setting. So a little busy, but it's incredibly meaningful, and it keeps me, I'm excited every day, and, to wake up and be able to, see what's coming next.
Yeah. Yeah. And how fun is that? I mean, what a beautiful life you've created for yourself, both of you. And that's an amazing thing, because we start, especially for those of us, in recovery, I'll never forget the feeling I had the day that I hit bottom and I realized, the long road that I had ahead of me. Because, you speak, Jessica, to getting back to your essential self. And I often talk that when I first got sober, it felt like I was like a million miles from myself. I felt so distant. I felt very far away from who I was. And I didn't even know who I was. And I didn't really like who I was. I knew that. Mm-hmm. I was like, if this is what I have to work with, I don't want it, you know? And I didn't know how to connect with that and to find beauty in that, to find the spirit, the energy, the gift of who I was. I didn't want to be who I was. And that's a lonely place to be. That's a scary place, and that's why, of course, recovery resources are so important, because when you're at that point, it's so crucial to connect with somebody who's been there and can say, hey, there's a way. It's possible. I've done it. Let me help you see some of the steps, some of the things you can do. Right. And then you realize you are a creator. Because I think when you connect with your essential self, you recognize, wait a minute, I get to sort of create my life. I don't have to be at the whim of things that happen to me, and again, you spoke of shame. And I think shame is a powerful driver, because we feel victim to the things that happen. And we say, because this happened to me, I'll never be this. And I'll always be this. I'll always not be good enough or not lovable. And I'll never really be successful. But when we recognize that that's only declarations that we're making and repeatedly making, that's the only thing that reinforces those. When you can let go of shame, you realize you're free. And that's when all the magic happens, right? When you get these beautiful, exciting lives that all of us are now living, right?
Yeah, it's so amazing hearing both of you, because that's so my journey. I had so much shame when I got sober, and it's interesting. Sometimes we hear people say, I feel ashamed that I did that. And I like to invite the question, is it possible I did that because I felt shame, right? That the behavior actually stems from the shame, and then we're in a shame spiral, right? So how many times have we heard hurt people hurt people? So I believed I was broken. I believed I was damaged goods. There was something fundamentally wrong with me, not just like I had some flaws. There was something fundamentally wrong with me. And to me, that's shame. It's set so deep in the core. And because of that, I acted that way in the world, and I chose relationships to confirm it. And I thought I was worthy of a job that didn't pay me well. And I found myself struggling. And like Jessica, I got sober really young. I was a year later than you. I was 20. It was actually like 50 some odd days before my 21st birthday, ironically. But, you know, growing up in recovery has so many benefits. It also has some shadow sides for sure. I had to like grow up and not be able to use drugs and alcohol as an excuse for my behavior, because the truth is that the drugs and the alcohol were my way of managing or coping, or what we in conscious recovery call a brilliant strategy. That was my brilliant strategy for survival. Take that away, what was left? The shame, the disconnection, the unresolved trauma. Recently, I have the honor of being on a platform called wholehearted.org. If you're not familiar, check it out. It's great. A lot of resources there, some amazing thought leaders. And there was a clip put on Wholehearted, and I said, what I want to offer you today is that you can heal from your trauma regardless of what has happened. And this woman, I think with a heartbreaking honesty, said, how dare you say that? We know that trauma permanently damages the brain. So for you to say that someone can heal is not helping. And so I sat with that, and I felt what I did is I allowed myself to feel that emotion. And then I remembered absolutely believing that there's no way I could heal. No way. If you knew what I'd done, if you knew what had happened, you would know there's no way I can heal. And so through the lens of compassion, I replied and responded with, isn't it wonderful that now we're recognizing what I love about this era is spirituality and science are coming together. Mm-hmm. And we understand now brain science and what we're seeing with, we literally can change our genes and our DNA, but looking at the brain, yes, it's true. Trauma affects the brain, but the great news is it's not permanent. And spiritually, the way I say it is, there's a place within us that is unharmed and unharmable, regardless of what has happened. Through science, we recognize now that we create new neural pathways in the brain. Mostly we frame that through behavior. I start behaving differently and I create a new neural pathway. I think that's important, and it's even deeper than that. As we start to heal the shame and the disconnection and the trauma, we actually start to change ourselves physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. And I absolutely hold that any of us can heal, regardless of the trauma. It doesn't necessarily, I would never want to say to someone who's in the depth of pain, oh, you can heal that, not in some dismissive way, but through compassion and saying, oh gosh, I believed that too. I believe there's no way. Yeah. If you knew how what a bad human I was, you would know I can never heal from this. Yeah. And that was just shame on top of shame on top of shame.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's so important, the more people speak to this openly, because I think so many people sit alone with their pain and with their wounds that they believe can never heal. And if you don't believe a wound can heal, you're going to let it alone. And then it just festers and gets worse and worse over time. And it manifests physically, and it just affects our whole being, body, mind, and soul. Right. Yeah. But the more that people talk about it, we can think, oh, it's okay to have a wound. It's okay to have this thing that, because a wound becomes a life force, right? The same the way that shame drives you, your wounds will drive you to do things to try and soothe that pain. To me, that's a lot about what addiction is like, I just want to do something that makes this feel better. This deep painful belief or feeling that I have about myself or about my life. So I think that the more we openly discuss the challenges of healing, but also how we heal, I think it's a game changer, because then it becomes more a part of life, just because we're all going to get wounds. It happens. Emotional wounding. It's just, and that's where the shame comes in, is like, oh, but it shouldn't have happened to me, so I have to keep it secret. But if we all are allowed to talk and say, I have this and it's hard to heal, because healing does take time and it happens by degrees. And so, for some people it's more intense than others. And it's, I know I've had healing processes that I wonder, is it possible for this to be fully healed? Will this go away? And it can take a long time, but I'm, in a spiritual capacity, I believe that it's part of our soul's evolution and growth. So when I'm in a good place, I can honor that pain and say, okay, this is helping my soul. Because any challenge, any healing is a growth, right? It's the most challenging times that create character and, evolution, maturity. So we can see it as a gift and a blessing, even though it doesn't feel like it at all. But I think it's easier to do that when we do it together. And we can say, okay, we're all in this together. We all have this experience. I'm not alone in having this horrific thing happen to me that I don't want to tell anyone about. And I'm so scared. And I just want to pretend it didn't happen. When we can speak out loud, healing can happen together.
Well, and having that, like you said, healing together, having that connection. And, I think I repeat this all the time. And I don't know who said this quote first, but this concept that mental health is health. We all have mental health. Every single human on this planet has mental health, right? And so we're not alone in this. And there's been such a collective trauma over the last 2 years with the pandemic, which has been tragic and horrific. And I'm not here to be dismissive of it. And at the same time, can there be a conversation from this? Can there be a discussion around, we are in the midst of, even in thinking about, I do a lot of work with young people and, like I said, adolescents, and, we were in a mental health crisis before COVID. And we can look at the numbers, and it was already bleak, and we didn't have enough providers. There was, increase in ER visits for suicidality. It was already happening. Increased substance use, increased overdose rates for, substances. And now there's a light on it. So now there's this, let's talk about it, right? So that decreases the shame, but it also brings this awareness and lets people know they're not alone. So I've been really appreciating seeing more discussions around, mental health and health in general, not just from advocates or the few celebrities or, which is wonderful, but just everyday people, all of us joining together and talking about, like, hey, how's it going? How are you? Oh, I'm not feeling great today. Oh, okay. What's going on? Right? Can it be okay? Can there be a safe space to talk in these ways? In an authentic, like really truly in an authentic way. And I think it's hard because we, again, thinking about those brilliant strategies that TJ, you talked about and different things that we do, I'm of the mindset that these were all things that we try to do to protect ourselves, right? So we can feel okay in the world, and they just end up not working anymore. And it is this constant evolution. Sometimes I wish it would end for me. I'm always like, oh, when do I get my prize? Like, that's how my mindset, unfortunately, still works in recovery. It's just like the addict inside of me that's like, okay, like I've reached that level now, right? Like, do I fight the ultimate bad guy at the end? And like, we're here now, right? We've ascended some kind of, and it's just, what I've learned is it's not that way, which still makes me mad sometimes because I want my prize, right? I'm like, where is it? Like, I just,
well, it's here. It's your life right now.
I know, right?
I just fabulous life.
I just thank you, right? But I'm not always in that place of gratitude because I have this humanity, right? I have this, I'm living in a, I have still a part of my experience is the human experience. And so what you spoke to, Whitney, too, which I just, completely resonated, was, sometimes, I don't believe pain is necessary for growth, but it does often lead to growth. And so much of it is, how can I appreciate healing? Can I find joy in healing even when there's suffering? And can I hold both of those things together? And I think in working with young people and working with adolescents, especially, and even reflecting back on my own adolescence, they have so many people in their lives that are telling them, don't do that. That's wrong. This is wrong. Act this way. Be better. You have to be like this in school. And I want to be that person that's there to say, oh, wait, tell me about that thing that you're doing. That's interesting. Like, wait, you're interested, it's, what do you want to do? Or, how can we take that and how can we transform it? Right? What if all of those things, those negative things, the messaging that we received, for me, that I received as a young person, what if someone had told me that it was actually a strength? And so just to come back to the recent publication and the launch of Conscious Recovery for Teens is, to me, that's really, I see is, it's foundational to it, is, like TJ said, the foundation of conscious recovery is that you're not broken. And for the work we're doing with adolescents, it's saying all those things that people were saying weren't good. What if they were? what if we looked at it in a different light? What if you are truly, what if you're a superhero? And we have that in our workbook, these superpowers, but you're actually a superhero. And to see the shift that happens with young people when you approach them in that manner, like just as, to me, it's just going, everyone deserves dignity. So whether I'm working with an adult in treatment, a young person, whatever walk of life, we all deserve that dignity. And I think it's that connection that is part of the healing, what you're talking about, that collective healing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the work with teens because, or even younger, because unfortunately the shame starts so young. It's because I think that we come into the world thinking we are superheroes and we're like, this is awesome.
Yeah,
And in
exactly.
life, we're having fun. And the first time we're told like, what are you doing? What was that? That was weird. Don't do that. It's like, you get this shock, that shock of shame. That's like, oh God, I'm not okay how I am. I can't do that. I can't be me. I can't express how I thought I could. And it's like, we're never the same. And, not to blame parents. I mean, we all we can't, we have these reactions sometimes, but it's just so impactful. And I wish that there were ways that you're speaking to where it's like you more sort of encourage and allow kids to be curious about what they're doing rather than like, tell them, no, that's not what we do. That's not, allowed or whatever it is. Because that shame just really sticks with you.
Yeah. And it is really planted at such an early age. And I remember when I got into recovery, I said I had the perfect childhood, right? And then maybe a year or two into it, I had the most horrific abusive parents and I was going to confront them and and I did the letters. And then another 3 years or 4 years into it, I had the perfect childhood again. And so I appreciate that you gave some compassion to parents, because I realized that what happened wasn't about blaming someone. It was about realizing what happened as you described it so beautifully, Whitney, that like there's a shock. And I remember, and I don't remember exact details, but I remember, I think I was watching TV, and I'm really dating myself, but there was a war happening in our country way back when, not World War I, let's not go that far back, or World War II. But when I saw it on TV and I was shocked. I literally, I remembered as literally a shock to my system. And it was a trauma experience, and I froze because it's horrific. It's horrific to see war. It was so painful for me to love my grandfather and hearing him say racist things, just like common language. It was confusing for me when my dad and his brothers were saying horrific things about women when the women weren't in the room. All of this was shocking to me. And I went into a trauma response, fight, flight, or freeze. And I pretty much froze. And I froze and I built a wall around my heart. And it was at those moments somehow, because intellectually, I can understand, like, why would I blame myself for all of that? But something happens in the young brain. If mom is mad, I'm bad. If dad is absent, I'm not lovable, right? It doesn't make logical sense as an adult, but as a child, 3, 4, 5, 6, I absorbed all of that. And my favorite word, concretized that into my unconscious. And that's why, and this is what's exciting for me in our conversation, it's one thing to identify the root causes of addiction. It's one thing to say we all have trauma, disconnection, and shame, but what do we actually do with it? And that's, I think, what's really needed. And for me, it's understanding that it doesn't get fixed, and I'm using air quotes because we're not broken, but it doesn't get changed only intellectually or behaviorally. And I think that's where a lot of the recovery models have been. That's a lot of where the mental health community has been. It's been about behavior, symptoms, behaviors, and thoughts. And all of that has a place. And the way we really do the deeper healing is to go back on, we don't have to re-experience the trauma, but I have to go back and be that 3-year-old and be that 4-year-old and realize what was happening and what I absorbed and the deep core decisions I made about myself. I remember when I was working with Mary Helen from probably 2 years to 5 years sober, I would sit with her for hours and we would go through, doing these deep inventories about the past. And she would always just pause and say, what did you decide about yourself? What did you decide about the world? What did you decide about men? Like I decided really early, women were safe, men were unsafe, of course. And believe me, through my history, that was true. But I decided it at such a deep level that I literally was so terrified of men that I cut out half the world's population from being safe, right? Just no, unsafe. And so it's not as much what happened. I had an obsession with trying to remember the exact specifics of my sexual trauma. An obsession, because I thought if I could remember the exact event and who was there and what happened, I would be able to be healed. But I realized that it was more about what the experience was, what the core decisions were made. Even a 5-year-old makes a core decision. I remember looking at my nephew when he was 7, and I looked at his beauty, his pure, effervescent self. And I thought, wow, that was the age I decided that I was damaged beyond repair. That was the age I decided the world wasn't safe. That was the age I decided I'm going to put a wall around my heart to save myself and protect myself. Honestly, I was just crying looking at him because I could see myself as this whole imperfect child making all these big decisions based on such limited information.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And, TJ, that's one thing that I really appreciate about your work. I mean, so many things I appreciate, but the idea that I think is so needed in recovery is that there was everything wrong with you and you were never bad. Because that was one of the things that led me to want to seek out other means of a recovery path is, the message I started hearing in other groups was that was the bad you. And I can never go back to that person. And to me, that's kind of like creating this like monster where you're like trying to put it in a closet and you're like, that thing can never come back out. Like that thing is condemned. It is out there, but that's you. Like you're talking about yourself, and the more that we say like that part was bad, so that part stays away, we're not fully integrating and accepting ourselves. We're not allowed to see our essence because, as you also spoke to, that bad self was just somebody who was doing the best they could to take care of themselves, protect themselves, and, save themselves at the time. That was the best they knew how to do. And so that's what I really work with clients on, is seeing, can you find a way to have compassion and understanding for that person and see that they were never bad. They were never evil. They were never trying to harm you. They just didn't know what to do and they did the best they could. And I think that messaging is so wonderful because it comes from a place of unconditional love for yourself, where you say, oh, no matter what you do, I would never dismiss you, And I think that that's so crucial. And I think that's a lot of what causes shame as a child is things that happen where we feel like somebody says, oh, I don't know if I can love you anymore because you did that. So because we feel it's conditional, and then, talk about being a driving force in your life. People will try to micromanage their life so they don't ever do something that makes that they think people might decide, oh, okay, well then that person, I have to reject them because they're, and that's so exhausting to live that way, And so that's why I just believe so much in people being able to, Jessica, as you spoke to, be their essential self and live freely and not have to feel like I have to control everything around me to be accepted, to be lovable. It's like, I just am. And that's and the thing is that that's the truth, and I know you speak to that, TJ, that core essential self, it's what it is. And it's always been the truth, but we mirror it with, these clouded ideas and thoughts and beliefs about ourselves. And it's just kind of about stripping away and uncovering that unharmable self that's always pure and perfect and right there and never left.
And Whitney, and thinking about the sense of, like you said, it's exhausting to try to be perfect every day. Just the sheer exhaustion. I've experienced it myself. And just what is it like if we just let ourselves be in the ease that we have in the world? What if, like I said, I feel like it's terrifying to face our true selves. And at the same time, wow, I don't have to keep running, right?
Yeah.
What if we just sat with, this is it actually right now, this very moment. And I have a lot of quotes I like, but one of them is love lives in the present moment. And I have to be here to experience it. And that's hard sometimes because even with fun stuff, I go off and, I'm a planner. I'll plan like 20, 30 years in advance. And I have to bring myself back, right? I have to bring myself back to the moment. The other thing I just want to comment on, and I made up a little saying, and I talk about this with clients too, is I say we got to put our SPF on. And what I mean by SPF is self-permission to fail. And I'm not even a big fan of the word fail, but it's this idea of like, I want to just try things. I want to just put myself in it and really in this childlike way. right?
Mhm.
I think we become so disconnected from this sense of play and lightness that we have as children, this innocence, TJ, this effervescence that you were speaking to. And I think so much of conscious recovery is, how do we get back to that? It's coming back to that place. And I often tell people too, is like, I say, the good news is you don't need anything extra. It's already inside of you.
Yeah.
Which I love. I'm like, sweet, because I'm already tired. Right? I don't need to do I don't need to do more, right? I had someone the other day tell me, Jessica, you're doing the most. You need to stop. Right? And just go, wow, what's it like to just sit with myself in this moment?
Yeah.
Well, and I think that is so important to lean into, Jessica, because I go into treatment programs throughout the country and I train clinicians on the conscious recovery method or model. And it isn't a training in the mind. And that's, for some people, that's not great news because they come in with their clipboard or their notebook and their pen and they want to, know exactly what conscious recovery is step by step. But it's really an experience. And inevitably, in the 7 or 8 hours I'm with clinicians, at one point, and I hope it always emerges, and it usually does, someone says, but that's beyond my scope of practice. I have been taught that I can't address trauma because it's beyond my scope of practice. And so what I want to focus on for a moment is what Jessica said. Learning how to be present with myself is the greatest trauma healing I can ever have. Learning how to be present with myself is the greatest relapse prevention tool. We give our clients relapse prevention tools. Like, here's, if you want to drink, call your therapist or call your sponsor or call your support group. We give them these tools, but we're not really helping someone understand. And I don't mean understand, but experience. I can actually be with whatever's present: anxiety, fear, joy. How many times have we had clients relapse because things were going really well and that was out of their comfort zone? And so, to a clinician who's watching or listening right now, if you work with clients and you've ever been told it's beyond your scope of practice to help with trauma, what I want to invite is, what I'm not saying is go in and dig for trauma and go back and have people re-experience trauma. But if you're facilitating a group and someone's trauma comes up, rather than shutting it down, just for a minute, if it's even, 60 seconds of being able to sit with that in the room is the most profound tool that someone can experience. And they'll take that with them much more than if you ever feel like drinking again, call this or do this. And I'm not poo-pooing that because it's useful, but how many times have we heard someone say, I knew I should have, but I couldn't. And there's wisdom there if we're really willing to listen. So as I learn how to be present with myself, and as I model that, because that's really the work as a clinician, as a counselor, therapist, or coach, I need to learn how to be comfortable with my own discomfort while facilitating a group. And then that allows for someone else to be. And lo and behold, I didn't have to drink. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to run out of the room. And if I do all that, that's okay too. That I can actually start to re-experience or reprogram the mind, the heart, and the body. Oh, I can be present with this. That's profound for someone. And that to me is trauma healing. And anyone, regardless of our license, can do that for someone. Just be present with someone, allow them to feel for even 1 minute, and just let that experience be in the room. Any of us can do that. And it's profound.
Yeah, it is profound. And it's amazing the immediate shift you can see when somebody has that experience, when they finally are able to just sit and speak of their trauma and just that it's allowed to be present. And it's like something lets go of them a little bit. It's when you, again, kind of understand you don't have to be afraid of it. It doesn't have to be this monster. It's just something it's just there. And if you can be with it, the same as with any other discomfort, it does kind of let go, and you just find this shift. And I've seen it in my clients where they're like, at the next few sessions, they're like, yeah, I feel better. I feel like I've moved on a little bit. And it's just remarkable.
Yeah, and Jessica, you spoke to something, and I'll just I think one of the ways that Jessica and I, one of the ways we bond, I think is we have a similar brilliant strategy. And I'll speak for myself. My brilliant
Let's see.
strategy
No, I probably agree with you.
for many years was just becoming a big major achiever. Just do, action, action, action. And that for me, that was about like, it was too terrifying for me to be present with myself. And I'm not talking about when I was drinking and using, I'm talking about the first, if I'm honest, 20 years of my recovery, right? I was still running. I was opening a new business. I was, getting in a new relationship. And there was something that was driving that. And it's not good, bad, right, wrong. It was a brilliant strategy. And there was a moment I realized, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to actually be present with myself. And then being present with myself allowed those strategies to start to shift. In other words, it's not about changing the behavior as much as it's about doing some of the deeper healing, and then the behavior starts to change. And I love, Whitney, what you said. It's not duality. There's not a good part of me and a bad part of me. If I consider something negative, what do I want to do? Get rid of it. That's the addiction. I want to get rid of this. Recovery is learning how to integrate it all.
Yeah. And I'm so excited that you guys did this workbook and just all work with teens, because as we said, it starts so young, but when you get these ideas early, it's like you learn the process, you learn how to kind of experience something and not hold and create this certain belief that can haunt you the rest of your life. You can just accept it and say, how can I sit with this? How can I know this doesn't determine who I am or my value or my worth? It's just something that happened. It's not who I am. And then be able to move through it. And then, it's a different experience of life. And so the younger that we're able to introduce these concepts, and especially teenagers and young adults, they're so hungry for ways to, as you spoke of, to accept themselves. They want so badly to be okay with themselves, but they don't know if they can. I was just working with a client yesterday. I specialize in eating disorders and body image. And TJ, I know you created a workbook for that as well, which is so wonderful because it's so needed. But my client was just in tears because her body had changed. And she just said, I just don't feel comfortable with this and I don't want it. I want what I had before and I feel like I lost it. And because it's all the ideas that go around with that. Well, how I am is bad and how I was before is good, right? That duality again. And then she's like, I just want to be able to be okay with myself as I am. But we struggle to know how to do that. And I think that, I imagine this workbook is super helpful for that because it shows you are okay. You truly are. And it's the most easy state in the world, right? It's the most natural state in the world too, but we don't believe that. So I think that the work you two are doing is to help people to click in with that concept that there's actually nothing I have to do at all. It's right here.
Absolutely. And that's so much of what has propelled, I think, our, my work and our work with young people is, in some sense, like, I don't really like the word treatment anymore these days, similar with TJ, but it's this concept of prevention is the best treatment. And if we can address people when they're young, it does, it changes the whole game, right? I mean, if, like you said, if they can get these concepts and these experiences early on, they don't have to keep behaving in these ways that aren't serving them anymore. And so it's not just going, oh, you're okay. Yes, you're okay. It's going, you're better than okay. And I work with so many young, and that's why we talk about, these are superpowers what are living within you. And in the workbook, we talk about the superhero and the villain. And we're very thoughtful when we talk about this villain concept and saying, no, the villain is part of you too. It's to be embraced. It's actually, there's no judgment on either the superhero or the villain as being good or bad. It's all you, and you are wonderful, right? And I think just to hear that, to have that validation in and of itself, as whether a young person or any age, it's like, really? That's okay? For someone to say it's okay to not, to have these other sides to myself, or to have these things that I've experienced that, I perhaps do feel shame about or do feel bad about, I'm still okay. And, with my work with young people, I often say too, like, especially when we see behaviors like addiction, thinking about substance use in particular, I go, they're often one of the most well-adjusted in the family, if I could say it that way, not to judge the other family members because everyone's dealing with their own stuff, but in a sense they're externalizing it, saying, see, these things are happening. I don't want to keep these family secrets. I want to show the world that there's something going on. I want to make a change, but it's just, they're doing so in a way that ends up hurting them. And so I really, when I work with kiddos, I go, you're the truth teller. I go, oh, you're the truth teller in the family who showed up. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's such power that they hold.
Yeah.
Because they have the ability to change really these cycles of truly intergenerational trauma, which
Absolutely.
is, that is mind blowing. And to go, and I get to tell them, hey, you have that power. And I get to bear witness to that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's so true. I have a lot of friends who have struggled with addiction or just in some way been sort of that standout individual in the family that was, problematic or had issues. But really, as you said, that's just, they're the ones showing the symptoms that are so prevalent. Because as we know, it's a family system. It's not ever just one person that's the problem. They're expressing and exposing what's kind of going on in a dysfunctional system where no one's really healthy. And what I found is actually that often the individual that kind of ends up, having some of the greatest challenges is the one that breaks free, breaks those, the cycle, breaks the generational cycle of that's been going on for a long time. It's like they've had enough. And that's how I felt. There was like something in me that was like, there's something not right here. And I drank and took drugs in order to like numb that discomfort. But once I got sober, I could see clearly and I would, without judgment, but it's like, oh, wow, it's not just me, but other people just aren't, coping with it the same way I am, but they also aren't dealing with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's sort of the essence of breaking free is you kind of have to, it's nothing, nothing happens without a bit of chaos. Right. And so, yes, it may be a bit chaotic and crazy when we go through addiction and recovery, but we're truly breaking a cycle that I believe carries on for lifetimes that we've probably been doing for lifetimes. And now we're going to have a different experience going forward. And that's profound and powerful. And if people knew that, I think that would also be comforting to think there is purpose behind this. There is reason.
It's amazing. I've been reflecting in the last few days. This is like the third time it's come up. My own recovery journey. I got sober in 1986, and my mom, soon after that, maybe a year into my recovery, got into recovery herself, not for substance use, but for other issues. And she and her sisters, my mom has 4 sisters. And there was a lot of sexual trauma on that side of the family. And there was a lot of issues with weight and eating on that side of the family. And my mom married a man, my father, who has 2 brothers. So it was on one side, I had 3 men, and on the other side, 5 women. And the men on my dad's side, we would probably call them sexual predators today, but hypersexual at very least. And they married each other because of that dynamic, right? They were attracted to each other because of that. My mom was sexually abused as a child. And when she got into recovery, she and her sister started doing these impromptu, and I think it was on a Friday evening once a month, they would all get together, cousins, all the women in the family were getting together. I wasn't allowed, but I would eavesdrop a little bit, don't tell. But they would actually start talking about the years and the layers of the sexual trauma that had happened in our family throughout generations and putting voice to it for the first time. And I just remember the healing that was coming from that. And I don't think I ever really felt the full depth of if I hadn't gotten into recovery, because mine, like I either was going to die or get into recovery, right? Because that's what we who choose drug addiction, we usually are going to either die or get into recovery if we're fully, if in so deep. So I kind of had to get into recovery if I was going to stay alive, but she didn't have to, right? She could have gone on her whole life kind of, working with it the way she did, but there was so much healing that came. And, I think my getting into recovery helped her too. And then her sisters. And there was this generational healing that started happening. And for some reason, that's been up the last 72 hours, that conversation. I had forgotten all about that until recently.
Wow. That's beautiful to hear that. Again, I'm learning more about you, TJ, even though I know you. And it's just thinking about, the healing, that all it takes is one person in the family. And you can be that one. And I think often someone, even myself getting into recovery, you don't think, oh, how is this going to affect the rest of my family or my loved ones? But it is amazing to see the change and the shifts that happen within an entire family when someone starts this journey. And sometimes, and coming back to, our work with teens, sometimes it is that young, sometimes it's the child. It's not the adult, it's not the caregiver. And so, thinking about our work with this curriculum with young people, we've been very thoughtful in making sure there are components that we have. It's called family connection, where there's an activity for the teen and their caregiver or parent to connect, because that's where the healing is going to take place for them. It's not going to happen in isolation, right? And I just really appreciate you sharing that, TJ. And, it makes me reflect on my own, family and upbringing, and, the evolution and the work that there is in going through this. And it's constant, right? There's a constant unfolding. There's always something new to be found, and things that, I hadn't thought of or that come back. And it's, but the great thing is I get to experience it. And I just wanted to comment on one more thing before I lose my train of thought. The word that came to me when you were both talking earlier, and I think TJ, you mentioned it, was, well, what comes from conscious recovery? What comes from it? And the word that came to mind, we've talked about this, is freedom. There's this beautiful freedom in it, right? Because again, that word exhaustion, the burnout, the trying, the perfection, all of those ways that these deep pain and, wounds, suffering, trauma, toxic shame can manifest in our lives. What if we didn't have to live that way anymore? And when we don't have to live that way anymore, to me, that's the freedom. And I'm just like have chills, because I also get to live it. I don't just, I get to talk about with my clients and with my colleagues in this professional way, but it's like going, no, I don't tell people or ask people to do things if I'm not living it. Now, it doesn't mean I'm living it perfectly. I'll say that, but there's a daily practice in it, which is just, there's a lot of hope in it too.
Absolutely. There's so much hope in everything that you both are doing in your work and what you're offering through conscious recovery, because it truly is a different way. I think a lot of people haven't considered, I know when I've recommended it and offered it to clients, they hadn't really thought of it this way before. And that's really powerful. And, Jessica, freedom is probably my favorite word, because to me, it is like the word of our times. I feel everything that's shaking in our world is to me, I see it as like breaking our chains that we live by, because humans live in chains, right? There's a quote that I love that says, humans are free, but everywhere we live in chains. And it's true. We create our own chains, and it's, as we said, it's exhausting. It's miserable. But really there's no chains. We just have to recognize that we're the ones who put them on.
TJ, can you tell the Mohini story?
Well, actually,
I want to know. That sounds like a type of drink, but I want to hear it.
It's very interesting. I'm not going to tell the Mohini story.
Okay.
I am going to tell the story of the elephant sanctuary in Thailand, which is essentially the same story.
Okay.
To give a little background. So the Mohini story is the story that I would tell a lot when I spoke. And my now husband, Will, he said to me, honey, you got to stop talking about Mohini. Enough already. And so Mohini kept coming up. And then when we did the Conscious Recovery for Teens workbook, Jessica's like, oh, we have to use that Mohini.
We have to have Mohini.
So I'm going to leave that, but when you talked about the chains, immediately what came up, and I wrote in Conscious Creation, my third book, I used this as the example. Will, my husband, went to Thailand, and he went to an elephant sanctuary. And he said that one of the elephants would rock back and forth when it was a time for her to eat. And the people, I'm actually feeling really emotional, because like I so relate to this. Right. And this elephant had been in the sanctuary for years, but she still rocked every time it was time for her to eat. And it's because when she was in captivity and in chains, they used to make her dance for her food, or they wouldn't feed her, right? So they had trained her. So anytime she was eating, she thought she had to rock back and forth. And even though the chains had been off for years, and that she was in this beautiful sanctuary where she was experiencing what we would call freedom, external freedom, there was a deep program in her that she had to rock, right? So it's literally Pavlov's dog, and all of us have that.
Yeah.
If we have trauma trapped in our body, and by the way, if you were born on planet Earth, and I think most of us were,
you got
not
it.
100% sure, not 100% sure. There's some debate about that, but let's assume we have trauma because of everything that we've already talked about, right? So I have these programs, and most of the time they're unconscious. And so, as Whitney said, we have these chains, and they're self-imposed, but they're also not our fault. They came as a deep program, and it's unconscious. So what we want to do is compassionately bring the unconscious into conscious awareness. And Carl Jung says it perfectly, and that is, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life, and we will call it fate, right? So I was completely unaware that I had chains on. I was completely unaware that my belief on my own brokenness was causing these relationships that felt really broken, or my stealing. My gosh, I was passionate about stealing in my late teens because I felt so damaged and so broken. And I used to have so much shame. I would never admit that. And it's like, I did that because I needed something to bring relief from this existential crisis and this pain. And so I can look at that young self now with so much compassion. I was like, please see me, please see me.
Yep.
Right. And that everything, trying to grab something outside of myself, like my umbilical cord was in my hand, trying to get fed.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah.
Wow.
A big reason why I became a therapist is because of my own experience in therapy, and just how transformative it was and how impactful. And I remember I had a therapist once, and I was telling her about what happened to me. And I was like, this is what they did to me, and this is what they called me. And everybody, said, just going on about my trauma. And I was speaking to this, and she said, but Whitney, you're the only one that's keeping that here. That's there. You're not here anymore. Nobody around you now knows about this. Nobody sees you this way that you saw yourself, but you are keeping it with you. You're keeping it alive. So so we keep chained to these events because it feels like our identity, and it feels like in some strange way that we have to keep ourselves connected to that, because just as you said with the Carl Jung quote, is that it becomes sort of our subconscious, like, this is my reality, but it's only because we keep recreating it. And we're free to leave it in the past. It's just finding that way to release those ties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
And
doors. Go ahead.
A wise person once said there are 3 steps: awareness, awareness, and awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's all of it. Wow. So of course, this is an amazing conversation and so much fun talking to you both, but I would like to get a little bit more into your work, and I would love to hear about the collaboration process and writing this book, because one, I'm kind of fascinated with writing books because I find it very challenging, and I'm like in awe of you guys for making something happen and again, giving birth to these ideas, because I'm still not there yet. But I'd love to hear how you collaborated. How did you come together? How did this, come into being?
Coffee.
That's it. Large amounts of coffee. It was coffee, the universe, long discussions about like Oprah, Super Soul Sunday.
How did you guys get anything done?
Well, like I said, honestly, and I don't know, I'd like to think TJ feels the same, is that it didn't feel like work for me.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think, look, in working with anyone, it's having a business partnership, which is a whole nother discussion, is there's such a trust that needs to be there. And I think it's so foundational. And I felt that immediately with TJ, and it evolves, right? And we've, like I said, I think we've known each other like 2018. What year is it? I don't even know what year it is anymore. It's sad.
Somewhere in the 20s.
We're somewhere in the 20s. So, I think over the last 4 years, I think we had tried to do multiple speaking events together, and things kept falling through, and then COVID hit. And then it was like, I just like hanging out with TJ. And then this opportunity came where it's like, let's take his amazing work from Conscious Recovery and let's take my work with young people and let's bring conscious recovery to young people. And that was it. And that was the ball rolling. And it was, let's take these concepts and provide it to teens and their families to, quite frankly, to transform lives. That's what it is. And that's it in a nutshell. And just the process itself has been so much fun. And, you know, just the creative process, seeing what comes from us being together that I just couldn't have had as an individual. I think that's been incredibly exciting as well. But ultimately, I think what drives me with this and our partnership is just my deep love and admiration for you, TJ, just as a human and then also a colleague. But knowing how many people we get to help. And that's it.
It's so interesting. My good friend, Dr. Krista Gilbert, I asked her one time, as she moved up into leadership in the behavioral health field, I said, do you miss working with clients? And this was many, many years ago. She was my first clinical supervisor. And she said, yes, but I realize I'm going to touch the lives of people I will never meet. And when she said that, there was a spark that came alive within me. And it was at that moment, because she's someone who knows how to ask the right question, right? And she's a highly intuitive and beautiful being, one of my favorite humans. And she just knows the exact right thing to say or the question to ask. And that sparked a curiosity within me. Wow, I wonder if this work that I'm doing with clients could be bigger than just me. And that question, really, I sat with that. And I started leaning into, I did a workshop once and it happened really organically. And we ended up writing down the most profound, life-changing moment that we considered to be really positive, like a pivotal moment, like an event that happened that changed us and changed the trajectory of our life in a positive way. And somehow organically in this workshop, what we came to is that's really our purpose. If we want to really live on purpose, we will create a space to provide that for others. Now, it can take all different forms, but my experience that transformed my life, there were a couple of them that came up, but all of them were about this deep awareness that I came into the world as a whole and perfect spiritual being, and I got programmed to believe I was something other than that. And I've had these moments where I remembered the truth that was beyond the illusion of the ego and the programming and the shame. And that was mine to bring to the world. And then I coupled that with what Krista said. And I thought, wow, what are the infinite possibilities of this? And, you know, on the surface, the reason, I mean, Jessica, just to be transparent, the reason I started wanting to work with you is like, oh, wow, she's so cerebral and scientific, and I'm so in my heart and spiritual, and we can blend these. And guess what? That's not really the whole story, not even close to the whole story, right? Because we're not one-dimensional beings. And even though we're finally, at least in theory, it's been postponed twice, we're finally going to have an event where we talk about science and spirituality meeting, but the collaboration ultimately is about how can we really help more people understand the innate power that's within them, that they are a whole and perfect spiritual being. And it takes so many different forms. And I love your expertise with adolescents too. And she had to reel me in a little on things.
I think go ahead.
Well, we had this idea of superpowers and superheroes, and neither one of us thought of that individually. It was a collective experience. Oh my gosh, they're like superheroes. And it just like exploded.
And how powerful is that to tell a young person, no, you are a superhero. Right. I mean, and that goes for us as adults. And I'll just say, that's why so much of this resonates with me still. I still am that kid in so many ways, in a good way, you know, but for so long I thought I just want a normal life. And I was fighting, what if it's okay to be extraordinary? With these young people, what if it's okay for you to be a superhero and have superpowers and be extraordinary? Because you are. And that's my message to them. And with Conscious Recovery and our work together with Conscious Recovery for Teens, that's what it is. It's going, you are, you know, telling the world, every single person, you are extraordinary. You don't have to run from that anymore. It's not an ego thing. It's a beautiful thing. So, and that's my belief. So, and that's the end of it for me, is just going, I believe that wholeheartedly. Every human recovery is for every single human or alien, if they are from another planet, which, like we said, is debatable, but it's for every single being on this earth and in this universe. They are extraordinary.
Yes, absolutely. And what an important message, a powerful message. And again, my hat goes off to you both for taking that idea and bringing it out, because TJ, what you described to me is like the miracle and the magic of creation. I've heard the idea that every idea exists in the ethers, right? That's why it'll often happen that two people will have the same idea at the same time about like a new innovation, but it's about is who's the one that will grab it and let it come forth through them, because so many people won't, because of their own blocks, their own things. So the fact that you both let it come out and we're like, I'm going to go with this. And even though it's challenging at times, I'm going to let it through. Then you're giving a gift to the world, because otherwise it wouldn't be expressed. It would stay in the ethers.
And what I love about that is you're touching something that's so vital. If there's ever been any period of my life or my evolution where I have felt stuck, I always go back to the purpose, because when I'm feeling stuck, it's usually that I think I know what it's supposed to look like, or something about my own personal, like, oh, I need something, or I need to be recognized, or I need to get this job, or I need this treatment program to adopt. Whatever that need story is, I go back to purpose. No, that's not what this is about. This is really about being a presence on planet Earth. Each of us, we're all a profound presence on planet Earth, and we can be this love and be this light. And if my shining my light impacts one human, that's profound. And we can now come together. The three of us have come together for this conversation to put words to, you are a whole and perfect spiritual being. You're an infinite being. You have the power within you. You are not only worthy, but you are a superhero. Wow. Really feel into that. And I think about my 5-year-old in kindergarten, and that's not the message I got. And it's certainly not the message that I took on. And so if we can be a voice for a different way of seeing ourselves, we've done our job here on planet Earth. And then it starts to explode. And then it becomes a movement, right? Because it's so much more than an individual ego.
Yeah. And I believe that's what's happening. There is a movement starting. And I would say, again, it comes back to freedom. Do we have to live this way? No. The answer is no. We do not have to live this way. And I think, again, more and more people are connecting with that and going with it and saying, well, if we don't, then how can we live? And it comes back to freedom. We can live freely. We are free. What does that look like? Looks good. It looks like a joyful life, right? Jessica, you talked about how we like dismiss joy. We're like, who's got time for that? It's like, that's why we're here.
Do not have time for joy. Only stress.
This is serious.
It's serious business here. Yeah, right. Like, who said? We said that. We're the ones that are like, no, you got to be busy. You got to do. It's all about the being, and joy is pure being. And that's what you're bringing people back to, and I feel that message so strongly in our talk and in this conversation. And I just love that. And I just love meeting with you both and being amongst others who feel it, who feel this and are carrying it out in this lifetime. It's beautiful. So thank you both for the work that you do. And if people want to find your work and get to know more about you and get the workbooks, where can they do that?
TJ.
ConsciousRecovery.com.
That's it. It's all there.
That's it. That's
beautiful
it.
Website. You can find everything there.
Yeah. Everything is there.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Whitney.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Jessica, for emailing me and then asking to connect and bringing us all full circle. I hope that this is the first of many conversations and collaborations.
I hope so too.
Wonderful to see you, TJ.
Thank you, Whitney. You too. I so appreciate both of you and everyone who's watching. I so appreciate being in this conversation.
Absolutely. All right, you guys, have a wonderful weekend.